Hello everyone, this is your friend and I am back with a new fanfic part 2. The fanfic title is What If Naruto Became the 5th Hokage Instead of Tsunade part 2. I hope you enjoy this fanfic, and if you enjoy this, so don't forget to subscribe my channel. Now let's start the fanfic. Good job, brat. Jiraiya praised his apprentice without turning his attention from the bevy of beauties bathing below. He suddenly chuckled as he thought of the alliteration his thoughts had used. I was hoping you'd come here first. It shows you're paying attention to patterns and prior experience. Very good. Wait. This was part of my training too. The disbelief in Naruto's voice was as is half the women in the nearby baths. Damn straight. We're ninja, Naruto. That means we aren't just soldiers. Shinobi are ins, spies, and saboteurs, too. Know what all of those have in common? They all require you to know details about your objective. That's why I'm proud of you for showing up here first. Naruto was not only mollified by his teacher's explanation, he was ecstatic. He hadn't expected to learn something so quickly. It's like that saying in the tower. You've got to have brains as well as power. Off to a great start today. Jiraiya finally turned around. We're actually going to work here for a bit. Take your shoes off. We're going to do some extreme water walking. Huh. Naruto struggled with his jacket. He was still sore from sparring Sasuke. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, Jiraiya announced a bit too excitedly. A second arrow sennin appeared in a puff of smoke. You are going to spar with my shadow clone while keeping afloat. Are you crazy? I've barely managed to stay afloat on my own. Plus, I've already sparred with Sasuke today. I'm still sore. Tough shit, Jiraiya's clone declared without a trace of sympathy. Do you think I got a break from fighting in the Second Shinobi World War? Be thankful that you're finding and surping your limits in training rather than crashing into them on the battlefield. Naruto gulped as he walked out on the water. His control was shot because Arrow Sennin's words had really hit home. He was going to be Hokage one day, hopefully very soon, and he could not afford limits. Naruto would have to be strong to protect everything he held dear. That single sentence from Arrow Sennin had done more to make Naruto understand the position of Hokage than any of the lectures from the academy. His resolve found its steel. That's it. That is exactly what I want to see. Jiraiya praised his student. Shinobi are those who endure. To endure, you need guts. Naruto brightened at the continued praise, and was punished for it. The Toad Sage's Kage Bunshin landed on the water in a crouch. Jiraiya's doppelganger executed a quick hook kick that forced Naruto underwater. The young man exploded from the hot spring, cursing Jiraiya's underhanded tactics and how freaking hot the water was. Part of your training, kid. Jiraiya's voice was completely void of sympathy. He was very proud that Naruto didn't sulk, but immediately went on the offensive. Occasionally, the boy would curse as his feet slipped into the near boiling water. Still, he's making incredible progress. He stayed on Bunta's head for an entire day. I think he'll have this down by the time we finish. The two gutsy shinobi were both very pleased when the original Arrow Sennin called for a halt to the sparring. Naruto grimaced as Jiraiya quizzed him on what he picked up in regards to Jiraiya's fighting style. The relentless questions continued as the master and apprentice reached their training ground. Jiraiya produced a few storage scrolls and spread them around a small part of training ground 17. Create a dozen clones. Jiraiya watched intently as Naruto followed orders. The Toad Sage quickly created 3 clones of his own. Naruto laughed as Jiraiya's clones bossed his own Kage Bunshin around. They'll be training with storage scrolls and basic fuinjutsu, Jiraiya explained while motioning for Naruto to follow. Now, for the jutsu. What is it, Arrow Sennin? I know it'll be awesome since it was Namikaze Minato's, but how does the Rasengan compare to the Hiraishin? What rank is it? How does it work? Naruto rattled off question after question. The Rasengan is a completely different jutsu than the Hiraishin. The Rasengan is the most advanced form of shape transformation in the world. Most importantly, it doesn't require hand seals. As for the rank, it's an A- rank technique. Don't worry about the Hiraishin yet anyway. That isn't your legacy like the Rasengan. Senju Tobarama invented the Hiraishin, even if Minato perfected it. Minato would have wanted you to learn the Rasengan first anyway. Jiraiya's voice actually hitched. He missed Minato even after all these years. That annoying, somewhat uptight, prodigy was damn near Jiraiya's son. Naruto fell silent as he took in his teacher's emotions. Eventually, he whispered a simple, "I'm sorry." "For what?" "Living." Jiraiya thundered. "Don't you dare apologize for living, brat. Since Minato isn't around to get angry at you for that, I will, even if he'd probably find it impossible to get mad at you." Kushina on the other hand. I don't understand, Jiraiya-sensei." Naruto stumbled over the words. For once, the Jinchuriki didn't call his teacher Ero Sennin. After that outburst, Ero Sennin would be a really bad choice of words. "You will soon enough," Jiraiya said cryptically before summoning a toad. "Tell Ma and Pa it's time." The toad nodded and disappeared. What's going on, Ero Sennin? The moment of caution ped as Naruto's mood stabilized just enough to fall back into the familiar routines. Jiraiya only grinned. "Try not to throw up. Reverse summoning is a bitch." Naruto realized just how much Jiraiya enjoyed trolling people with horrible, nigh unforgivable, understatements. The younger man's mind and body weren't prepared for the reverse summoning. Naruto's stomach churned. "Thank goodness I've already used up most of my lunch." Naruto thought woozily. For once, Naruto was grateful for the presence of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. The nausea quickly ped and Naruto was able to get a look at his surroundings. It was a paradise. The sun warmed the tropical environment to the perfect temperature. Plant life and dozens of toads created a bright, colorful palette that had no equal anywhere in the world. Jiraiya graciously allowed the young man his moment of awe. He remembered his first trip to Mount Myoboku. Naruto laughed as he dashed off to explore and introduce himself to the various toads in the immediate area. This place is incredible, Ero Sennin. Am I really going to learn the fourth jutsu here?" "No," Jiraiya said gently as soon as the awestruck and excited teen skidded to a halt. The veteran shinobi placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder. "This is where you'll learn your father's jutsu." The world suddenly stopped. Naruto's young mind failed to comprehend the beautiful surroundings that had enraptured him. The sounds of the jungles and the conversations of toads felt muted and ever more distant. If Naruto could have seen the insides of his throat, he readily believed it would have resembled the parched, rough material that Gaara was encased in following his transformation. This was just all too much. His mind, his heart, his very soul could barely take this revelation. Naruto was finding it hard enough to keep it together following his nomination. The emotional shock was part of the reason he had asked out Hinata. That was part of Naruto's original plan. After the Chunin exams, Naruto had expected to be promoted to Chunin. After rubbing his promotion in Sasuke's face for a bit, he would have asked out Hinata and started going on, hopefully, a few dates. He'd take some kick missions and make Jonin on his 16th birthday. 2 years of A and S rank missions would lead into his own Genin team. Then, after his students made Chunin before Sasuke's students, he'd be ready for the Hokage's hat then. I never thought I'd say this, but I will be a bit disappointed making Hokage so soon. I was really looking forward to having a Genin team. That return of coherent thought gave Naruto just enough of a mental spark to erupt. You hole. I know you said today would change my life, but not this much. Why tell me now? How do you even know? I know because I'm your godfather. I may be the shittiest godfather in human history, but I'm still your godfather. Your parents, Namikaze Minato and Uzumaki Kushina, chose your name from the hero of my first novel. Which wasn't a porno, by the way. Naruto desperately used his forearms to wipe away his tears. It's bad enough that he sealed the fox in me. It would have been so much worse if I had gotten my name out of smut. Kushina, your mom, hated my Aika Aika series. I think she threatened to beat me with a frying pan once a month for not writing more books like The Tale of the Gutsy Shinobi. Why did they have to die? Why seal that fox in me? Naruto asked in a very small voice. What I'm about to tell you is a state secret. You can't tell anyone right now. When you become Hokage, you'll be limited to your advisors and certain jonin. Naruto nodded at Jiraiya's words. The Kyuubi wasn't just a rampaging act of nature. It was an act of war. Naruto, this will be the first of many difficult words, but you aren't the first Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. In a way, you are carrying on an Uzumaki family tradition that began with Uzumaki Mito, the wife of the first Hokage. The second Jinchuriki was Uzumaki Kushina. Naruto's whisper was so at odds from the rambunctious pain in the Jiraiya had grown fond of. Your mom. Hey, I'm sure I'll get this question. Jiraiya laughed as he opened a storage scroll. He produced a few balloons. I'm going to share the story of how Minato and Kushina got together. While I tell the story, I want you to work on this jutsu. Feel free to make a bunch of shadow clones. Oh, okay. Naruto agreed as he followed Jiraiya to a nearby stream. So, how did they meet? Jiraiya smiled as his gambit seemed to be paying off. There was no way Naruto would accept any bullocks about. Minato couldn't ask any other parent to do what he wouldn't do himself. That would result in one thing: Naruto hating his parents. Jiraiya would sooner dedicate himself to celibacy and cut his own balls off before letting that happen. Those two would have made damn fine parents. Instead, Jiraiya was going to introduce Naruto to his parents. The jutsu I'm going to teach you was your dad's, obviously. It's called the Rasengan and it's based off something that furball in your gut can do. Jiraiya began to explain the jutsu. The first stage of learning the Rasengan is to spin your chakra. If you do it right, you'll pop the balloon. Naruto accepted the first balloon and gave it a whirl. He was determined to master the jutsu fast. Arrow Sennin, how long did it take Pa to master this jutsu? Years, Jiraiya admitted. He saw what Naruto was planning. Kid, if you can pop that balloon by the time I finish your parents' love story, I'll teach you something your mom taught me. Naruto's eyes lit up and he summoned the largest horde of Kage Bunshin Jiraiya had ever seen. Half of you, grab a balloon and get started. The other half, pay attention. Jiraiya had always enjoyed having a captive audience. There was something about close to 150 smiling Narutos standing, sitting, or in a few cases, hanging upside down from tree branches. He reminds me so damn much of Kushina. I can see Minato giving Hiraishin a workout rescuing his knuckle-headed wife and son from treehouse construction mishaps. The Toad Sage began his story on Kushina's first day at the academy. He explained, from memory with almost no embellishment, about how both Minato and Kushina announced that their dreams were to become Hokage. The second Naruto and his horde heard his parents' reason for becoming Hokage. There wasn't a single dry eye amongst the crowd. Normally, Jiraiya would have started to brag about his gifted storytelling abilities. This wasn't the time. A few of Naruto's Bunshin proudly conversed about how cool, and a bit scary, their mom was after Jiraiya revealed that Kushina didn't take crap from anyone. It simultaneously warmed and pained Jiraiya's heart that Naruto was so excited to learn about his parents. I shouldn't have to be telling stories. He should already know most of this from Kushina. The Toad Sage's lament was broken up by several exclamations punctuated by, Dadbao. Jiraiya exploded into laughter, which became a raging inferno of comedic exuberance. What's so funny, Arrow Sennin? The original Naruto snapped out a question. Jiraiya wiped a tear from his eye. Your mother was terrified you'd pick up a verbal tick like her databane. I'm just thinking about much of a mama's boy you would have been. Most young men would have been offended at being declared a mama's boy. However, Naruto was desperate to any connection to his parents. He let it slide, because Jiraiya continuing his story was more important. The Hokage candidate felt a prickle of memory as one of his Fuinjutsu training clones dispelled. He grinned and looked down at the balloon he was half-heartedly working with. His attention was 90% on Arrow Sennin's lessons about his parents. Naruto watched as the balloon almost popped. What am I doing wrong? Brat, you're doing really good actually. I've seen some of the progress you and your horde are making. It took me a week to figure it out. And before you ask, no, I won't give you a hint. Jerk. A Naruto clone grumbled. I should smash your notebook with a club. Or cut it up with a kunai, another Cage Bunshin threatened. Which one of those cuts again? The Toad Sage prompted. Think about thickness. Naruto stared at the training aid for a second. I thought you said you weren't going to give hints. I'm a ninja and a spy. Lying is a valuable career skill, Jiraiya casually confessed. Naruto mumbled a few curses that ended with an emphatic ttebao. He concentrated his chakra into a thin blade rather than a thick blob. Almost got it. Naruto shouted excitedly. Guys, think thin. Like the ice we were always on with Iruka-sensei at the academy. A clone somewhere in the middle of the gaggle asked. Exactly. Naruto confirmed. He quickly turned to Jiraiya. So, how did Pa sweep Ma off her feet? Kumo, Jiraiya started. The Raikage ordered an operation to kidnap Kushina for her special chakra. Sounds like Hinata and Ma have something in common, Naruto observed. The Toad Sage snorted. That's about it, honestly. You are pretty much a boy version of Kushina. That's a compliment by the way. Your mom was a hell of a shinobi and could light up a room. I don't know much about your girlfriend, but from what I've heard, she's got more in common with Minato. Quiet, a bit introverted, and occasional moments of near-suicidal determination. Jiraiya's comment opened up a storm of emotions in the young man. He blushed a bit when his godfather used the G word. The comparison to his mom was welcome. It was also nice to learn more about his dad, but Naruto wasn't sure he appreciated the last description of his dad or girlfriend. From what your parents told me, and what I learned from other sources, about the incident. The Sannin began his story. Occasionally, the author and legendary shinobi was interrupted by cries of, Pa was a bad. There had been only a few interruptions as welcome. The next interruption was just as welcome. The original Naruto grabbed a balloon from a frustrated Cage Bunshin and strode purposefully to his teacher. He held out the balloon and soaked Jiraiya when it exploded. So, what's Ma's technique? Naruto was alone in his apartment. Ero Sennin's revelations had been one of the greatest and most heart-wrenching of the young man's life. Jiraiya had given Naruto something he had craved for most of his life, knowledge of his parents. The knowledge was making Naruto's mind a fair approximation of his name. His thoughts rolled wildly in his head. The young man had laughed himself to tears several times as he recalled Ero Sennin's stories. Sometimes as he thought of his dad being scared of his mom's rampages against those who wronged her, he'd laugh enthusiastically to the point his sides ached. Other times, the pain that his parents weren't the one to tell him the story nearly crushed him. Jiraiya had informed Naruto that if he needed anything, no matter how trivial, that summoning a toad and sending a message would get Jiraiya to Naruto almost instantly. There were a few times while thinking about his parents where Naruto considered summoning a toad. He needed some form of support. At least I know, Naruto said to the world. At least know who my parents were. Naruto had fished out his academy history books to look for the information on his pa. He was hoping that there might be some info on his ma in there too. Unfortunately, there was nothing on Uzumaki Kushina, but some interesting facts about Minato. The book mentioned his mastery of the Hiraishin and how he forced Iwa to surrender in the Third Shinobi World War. I still wish there was more info on my ma, Naruto complained. I wonder if there's any way I could get some info on ma. Maybe there are records on Genin Team IGN Ments at the academy. Further ruminations on the subject were cut off quickly. Naruto nearly jumped through his apartment's ceiling when he heard the knock at his door. 3 Cage Bunshin appeared at various points in the apartment. Naruto noticed that one of the clones was focusing his chakra into the buzzsaw form from stage 1 of the Rasengan training. Who is it? Naruto called out. Good evening, Uzumaki-san. My name is Shimura Danzo, a Jonin of Konoha and one of the elders of the village. The voice traveled well and Naruto heard it clearly. One of the clones shot Naruto a disbelieving look. Naruto nodded. Why are you here so late? You have been training with your master, Jiraiya of the Sannin. It was not my place to interfere, Danzo said succinctly. Naruto could tell that Danzo's story was fishy, but it was probably at least part of the truth. I am here to talk to you about the Hokage election and your nomination. Naruto sighed. If Naruto wanted to win the hat, he couldn't piss off one of the elders of the village. He had the Kage Bunshin closest to the door let Danzo in. Welcome to my house. Naruto tried to be polite. The elder took a look around the small apartment. He noticed the defensive formation Naruto's Kage Bunshin were in. The quick thinking and instinctive tactical sense greatly pleased the leader of the defunct Root organization. There were three other details that stood out to Danzo. First, there was a small room in the rear of the apartment that was designed to be a second bedroom. Naruto had converted it to a training room. The darkness of Shinobi could see a few scrolls, a human-shaped star target with vital points crudely and somewhat accurately marked, and a pull-up bar. Good, Uzumaki-san, good, Danzo thought. The second detail was Naruto's window. The locks were clearly used and there was evidence that Naruto routinely put traps up at night. Finally, Naruto's apartment was what one would expect from a teenage boy. This was a very good sign for Naruto's chances to be elected for the position of Hokage. It showed that the social isolation and near-institutionalized bigotry from the majority of civilians and even some ninja had not destroyed Naruto's spirit. I doubt that is even possible, Danzo thought. Everyone had heard of Naruto's declaration in the test Ibiki proctored. Where others had panicked and given in, Uzumaki Naruto had a completely different reaction. He had been offended by Ibiki's mind games. It showed strength. Strength to rally people. Strength to stare threats in the face without blinking. That was what Konoha needed. Thank you for letting me in, Danzo said politely. If you don't mind, I would like to discuss the election. Oh, Naruto asked. Feel free to take a seat on the couch, it's the only really comfortable seat I've got. Thank you, the elder said as he shuffled to the couch. Naruto felt there was something a bit off about Danzo, but didn't want to say anything. The old guy was an elder of the village after all. Naruto pissing the guy off would really hurt his chances. I would like to congratulate you, Uzumaki-san. Even Hiruzen was not nominated at such a young age. Though, his nomination and ascension were simultaneous and rather more urgent. I heard it was at the very start of the Second Shinobi World War. Naruto recalled some of the information from his time at the academy. His tone was reverent. The third Hokage had been an enormous influence on the young man's life. Danzo suddenly had a faraway look. A few months in, we were surrounded. Why you were there? Naruto asked. Danzo nodded, but inwardly two mental processes were competing for his focus. The first was the memories of the fear, the desperation, and all the emotions of war. The second was his current plots. Years of determined and relentless self-indoctrination succeeded. Danzo began weaving his tale. The greatest weapon Danzo had in this moment was the absolute truth. The leader of Root did carefully select his words to give the impression that his friendship with Hiruzen hadn't died that day. Naruto would occasionally, politely, interrupt to ask questions about Tobirama-sensei or the situation. Danzo paused in his story. It was time to drop the first breadcrumb. This would be the start of Naruto's test. What would you have done in that situation? Am I Naruto or Tobirama? Naruto asked. Danzo was pleased by the question. It was refreshingly intelligent. Naruto was demonstrating that he had ideas on multiple levels. The academy had truly failed Naruto. If it hadn't been for Yumino-sensei, even with his tragic adherence to the will of fire, Uzumaki-san would not be on the path to Hokage. Naruto would have been on the path to becoming the self-fulfilling prophecy Konoha feared. Be yourself, Danzo encouraged. His command wasn't encouraging excessive individualism. Naruto, like Danzo, was a shinobi. They were simply parts in the greater machinery of Konoha. It would take longer to replace the parts Uzumaki Naruto and Danzo played for the glory of the village, but they could be replaced eventually. I'd stay back. I wouldn't give anyone else the chance to volunteer. Naruto's voice hitched as emotions danced beneath the surface of his words. My skill with Kage Bunshinen. Naruto paused. If this man was a village elder and a friend of old man Hokage, then he probably knew. Relief and worry warred in Naruto's eyes as Danzo nodded in confirmation. There was no judgment or shock in the very old man's features. All Naruto saw was the acceptance of a basic fact. The Kyuubi give me the best chance to cover the escape. I'd create as many Kage Bunshin as I could. A good number would henge into my friends. They'd scatter in random directions to force the enemy to choose which group to chase. What if the enemy had a sensor nin? Danzo asked. He was getting curious about Naruto's planning abilities. This was an incredible opportunity to gauge Naruto's tactical skill. Danzo would need a baseline to work from as he molded Naruto into the greatest Kage in the history of the shinobi world. Neji's Byakugan couldn't tell the difference between me and my Kage Bunshin. Unless they have a technique better than the Byakugan, which I call bullshit on, they won't be able to tell. The answer was a very good one in Danzo's opinion. It showed that Naruto had picked up valuable information from a single battle. With the proper tutors and motivation, Uzumaki-san can progress quickly. Combine that with the memory transfer aspect of the Kage Bunshin. Yes, he will reach true Kage status far faster than anticipated. More importantly, the young man's answer showed strong nationalism. Danzo nodded. He did not smile, but Naruto could tell that the kind of creepy old guy was pleased with his answer. Naruto was going to play along, though. This guy was an elder. He could definitely swing a few votes that might push Naruto over the top. You mentioned using the Kyuubi's chakra, Danzo continued. Did you know that most of Konoha's older shinobi forces were aware you wielded it during the match against Hyuga Neji? Naruto blanched for a moment. I figured some people recognized it. Uzumaki-san, there is no need for fear. The display of power ended some of the fear surrounding you and the Kyuubi. The root leader watched as Naruto appeared to be liberated. Danzo quickly continued. He could not believe his luck. This was an opening that had to be thoroughly and ruthlessly exploited. You were in complete control of the Kyuubi's chakra. It was a spectacular appearing display, but only lasted as long as you commanded it to last. How did you control such power? What state of mind were you in? Naruto was quiet as he thought back to the match. I told the stupid fox to lend me its power. I guess I pushed my emotions to the corner for a second. The fox's chakra is really angry. I couldn't let it control me. Ibeo. That statement was more than the village elder and rival of the third Hokage could have ever hoped for. Not only was Naruto's statement the perfect opening, the very wording aligned with Danzo's philosophy. Control of one's emotions is a crucial skill for all shinobi, especially the Hokage. A shinobi must be in complete control of their surroundings, whether they are on a mission, in the village, or in any other situation. A Hokage must be prepared to make decisions that impact and ultimately benefit the village as a whole. In order to make the wisest decision, you can't be angry. I have trained many Anbu, Jonin, and other powerful agents of Konoha throughout my service to our village. I wish to extend this training to you as well, Uzumaki-san. Thanks, Naruto said excitedly. New training was always cool. I'll just have to check in with Ero Sennin. He's teaching me my favorite Hokage's original jutsu and another jutsu. The training is pretty intense and I don't know how I'll fit that in the schedule. I mean, it'd look bad if I showed up to meet the daimyo exhausted, sweaty, and dirty Ibeo. He'd probably get annoyed that I couldn't keep track of time better and definitely be mad if he thought that I thought he wasn't even worth a shower. His answer was childish, but airily accurate. Our daimyo is a rather foppish, vain, and punctuality-obsessed civilian. Danzo continued to observe Naruto. The boy was very rough around the edges, but if he had more dedicated teachers in the past, he would have likely already be a Chunin. Tragically, this denial of Naruto's true potential and skill served Konoha's and Danzo's interest far better than Naruto being a Chunin. Konoha needed Naruto in the recent Chunin exams. If he had not been there, Shukaku's rampage would have done incalculable damage. Naruto would also not be in a position to provide Konoha with the political stability it required. Kumo and Iwa were blessed with a powerful amount of political stability. That stability had translated into greater autonomy from their nation's daimyos, greater trust from clients, and far greater military strength. Iwa's military strength wasn't in numbers, but its nigh unalienable defensive position. Kumo, on the other hand, had the sheer military power to overwhelm the Land of Frost and likely push all the way to the Land of Fire's capital before Konoha would have a chance to leverage its superior population and vast network of alliances. Electing Uzumaki Naruto was, in a very real way, a show of strength. The other villages would likely probe the Land of Fire's borders to test the resolve of the child Hokage. A suitably resolute and successful counter would provide Konoha with more than enough breathing room to rebuild and restore itself to glory. The relationship you have with Jiraiya of the Sannin is a special one. Uzumaki-san, I was impressed by how you approached the situation with the daimyo. Have you met him in person before? Danzo was clearly playing to Naruto's need to be acknowledged and receive praise. Naruto knew it. Danzo knew Naruto knew it. However, Naruto was starved for such attention and allowed the moment to continue. No, I've only met his wife when I captured her crazy cat, Naruto admitted. Why, you were very accurate in your estimate of our daimyo, Danzo admitted. How did you come to that conclusion? Naruto thought about the daimyo's somewhat crazy wife for a few seconds. Well, her clothes weren't just really expensive. They were really, really clean. I mean, if you have a servant that follows you around to keep lint and dust off your clothes, you've not only got WAAAAY too much money, but are WAAAAY too serious about staying clean. One of the flunkies was also talking about keeping to schedule. So, I assumed that someone was big into being on time. I was correct, the darkness of the shinobi announced triumphantly to the world. You truly are the candidate with the most potential. My efforts have not been wasted. What efforts? Naruto asked. The nine-tailed fox's Jinchuriki sprang to his feet. Wait, that's how I'm getting all those votes. Just how many have you gotten me? Several, Danzo admitted. Jiraiya convinced Morino Ibiki to vote for you. The coastal patrol platoons are united behind you. There are rumblings that you have strong support from the Hyuga clan. The declaration you made to Hyuga Neji has endeared you to several cadet members. Cool. I really owe you a few. Naruto exclaimed. I'll have to pull out all the stops when I finally take Hinata on a date. If I'm getting a few votes from her clan, the least I can do is spring for some extras on the date. I mean, I was already going to take her on an awesome one. She's awesome and deserves it, ya know. But to thank her clan, I'll kick it up a notch. I was unaware you were pursuing the Hyuga heiress, Danzo confessed. Immediately, he wondered how such a union could be leveraged for the good of Konoha. If Uzumaki Naruto wasn't already unquestionably loyal to Konoha, a romantic entanglement with the Hyuga heiress could bind Naruto to the village. That plan wasn't necessary, but it did present other opportunities. Shuichi's line possessed the purest and most powerful Byakugan. If Uzumaki-san can learn some of his clan's hidden jutsu, yes. That combination could produce the ultimate sensor nin and an incredibly powerful frontline fighter. This relationship must produce offspring, even if it requires alternative measures. Pursuing makes it sound like I'm a fanboy or something. Hinata and I are actually dating like normal people and not acting like Sasuke's fangirls towards each other. I respect what she's got going on too much, Naruto confessed. That could lead to a long-term relationship. Hopefully with multiple future children. When you eventually pee to the Pure Land, Konoha will need a replacement Jinchuriki. A Hyuga Uzumaki hybrid would be the perfect container. It is getting late, but I have two gifts for you. Danzo reached into his sleeve and produced a storage scroll. First, this scroll has documents regarding all the dignitaries who will be present at the official nominations. I strongly suggest that you study the information. A strong showing tomorrow will help secure your destiny as Hokage. Thanks, Naruto said with a tiny bit of forced enthusiasm. It was obvious that the suggestion to study was anything but a suggestion. Naruto had heard orders before. That was clearly an order. Honestly, it didn't bother Naruto all that much. This was to help him become Hokage. Besides, I can just have Kage Bunshin handle that. What's the other gift? A small sheet of very boring looking paper appeared between Naruto and Danzo. What is it? Danzo sighed. He should have expected Naruto to be unaware of chakra paper. I assume you are aware of chakra nature. Sure am, Danzo Gigi, Naruto boasted proudly. His enthusiastic reply forced him to miss the annoyed look on the village elder's face. Kakashi Sensei's Chidori is lightning release. Sasuke's got some fire release techniques. On the mission to Wave, Team 7 fought some water release users. Danzo reapplied his mask of emotional control. Good. Very few genin have encountered such variety. Almost all shinobi have a elemental affinity. The paper in front of you is chakra paper. It is made from trees that grow in areas rich in chakra. When you channel your chakra into the paper, it will react in very specific ways. Can I go ahead? Naruto asked eagerly. Danzo acquiesced. The young man eagerly funneled his chakra into the paper. Naruto's chakra paper split instantly in half, but also parted with far more force than expected. Did you channel any of the fox's chakra? Danzo asked curiously. That level of power shouldn't be possible for a genin. Nope. Naruto boasted. That was all me. Such powerful chakra. A shame I couldn't secure him years ago. Properly guided, Naruto would have already been on the level of Uchiha Itachi, Hatake Kakashi, or Kino. Danzo couldn't believe the potential of the boy. There was no doubt that even if Uzumaki Naruto wasn't the container of the greatest of the Biju, that he would have been an exceptional shinobi. Impressive, Uzumaki-san. The paper split in two and was pushed apart. Wind is your chakra affinity, and it is very powerful. Naruto beamed at Danzo. That's awesome. It is also, the elder chose his next word carefully. His every action so far was geared to endearing himself to Naruto. Danzo wanted Naruto to view him as a mentor. Root was hoping to increase their influence over the next Hokage. Exceptional. Wind release is incredibly unique in Konoha. Uzumaki-san, with your work ethic and dedication, I believe you will be the greatest wind release user in Konoha's history. Naruto's head was swimming. He had never gotten this much praise from an old guy, not even from the third. Is there anyone who can help me with wind release? There are a few, Danzo revealed. Talk with your sensei tomorrow. After the election, we will need to establish a proper schedule. Hokage-sama. If Naruto's head had been swimming before, the end of Danzo's sentence was the equivalent of Kakashi hitting Naruto with a water release, water dragon bullet. Alright. The young man had just be acknowledged as Hokage, and it wasn't in jest or an attempt to mock Naruto. Someone, who had actually been actively fighting for Naruto to become Hokage, had just shown faith that Naruto was going to be Hokage. I bid you good night, Uzumaki-sama. Tomorrow, you will make history and leave another unforgettable mark on the world. Good night, Naruto said in a daze. One of Naruto's Kage Bunshin, which had never dispelled, opened the door for the elder. After the elder left, the Buzzsaw Pseudo Rasengan clone walked up to the original Naruto. Do you want us to study that scroll? Why yeah, I'm going to grab some sleep, Naruto agreed. He headed off to bed. The Hokage candidate managed to catch a few hours of sleep. Today's weight pulled him down from the realms of dreams. Naruto couldn't remember most of the dreams. There were flashes he recalled, mostly conversations with his ma and pa about jutsu, his rivalry with Sasuke, or dating. Uzumaki Naruto couldn't sleep. It really was bad enough that tomorrow was the day. There was so much riding on his meetings. He had to be ready to grab his dreams with both hands. If he couldn't sleep, he'd be productive. Naruto marched into his sitting room and informed the Kage Bunshin they could dispel. He had work to do. It was time to hone his weapons. It was time to show the world that Uzumaki Naruto was going to be the Godime Hokage. Author's note: I'm not going to freak out over the number of reviews. I've done that enough. You can ask Gazurik, Chewy Cookies, Dread Knight N7, Entilza, and Silent Sambo 88 for proof. Anyway, thank you all. Quick updates: I'm still hard at work on Towards the Dawn, Chapter 3, Meet the Hyuga, Chapter 3, and Shadows on the Horizon, Chapter 3. 3 Chapter 3s. Half-Life 3 confirmed. Towards the Dawn, Chapter 3 is already gigantic. It is sitting at 10,510 words as of this chapter going live. I've still got a ton left. This chapter could rival the word count of one of Kinkakashi's excellent chapters for Naruto vs. Sasuke, The Aftermath, and Silent Sambo 88's also excellent, and Uzumaki Scorned. Speaking of highly recommended fics, I've got one that isn't in the Naruto section. Written in Stone has been kind enough to leave a number of awesome reviews for many of my fics. I was already a huge fan of one of her fics, so that was awesome. The FIC in question is The Sith and the Senator. It is a Star Wars prequel era. In fact, it's the best prequel era I've ever read. The Sith and the Senator is one of the best Star Wars fics I've ever read. I'm going to say this definitively: Written in Stone has written the best first-person FIC I've ever encountered. Full stop. Full stop. Anyways, I hope you all continue to enjoy this story. Remember, constructive reviews are welcome. This was not how Naruto wanted to start his day. As he stared at his adversary, he knew in his heart of hearts that he had failed. He had tried numerous strategies, gambits, and sheer desperate pleading. There would be no respite. It was official. Uzumaki Naruto had not the faintest clue how to make decent tea. I need to stop throwing Kage Bunshin at every problem, Naruto grumbled. The young man turned towards his clock. Bleary-eyed, Naruto read the time through yawns and mental fatigue. Numbers were replaced by pretty much pointless trivia about Amai Ayumu, the young Han of the lands surrounding Konoha. Amai-sama has been Han for 6 months. She admires shinobi and was actually a genin for 3 years before her father died. Amai-sama completed 16 D ranks and 3 C ranks. The information on the young noblewoman faded away to reveal the number 7. Once again, Naruto found his mind focused on facts related to the noble whose lands provided Konoha with almost all of its food. Ayumu had a great deal of respect for the third Hokage. Naruto shared that respect. It was an angle he knew he could work. Tsunade still had a lot of momentum to be elected. Naruto was gaining, however. No matter who wins, we're going to need to keep Amai-sama on Konoha's good side. If Amai-sama gets pissed, she can make food really expensive for us. Naruto thought. He idly wondered if there was a way to set up small farms inside Konoha without angering the local nobles, as the number 15 registered in Naruto's mind. That idea was dangerous, however. It could be seen as Konoha not trusting the land of fire or a personal insult against the nobility. Politics are hard, Naruto groaned. There were a few times where he regretted his attempts at studying with Hiashi. Yes, Naruto had learned months' worth of information on politics and government in a few days. It was still a challenge to keep the crazy amount of details, quirks of nobles, and rules for being super polite straight. The possible Godime Hokage decided he needed fresh surroundings to keep his sanity. Haruno Sakura sighed as she stared at her wall. The Chunin exams had been a true wake-up call. Sakura had every intention of living up to her oath that it was time for Sasuke and Naruto to look at her back. The Kunoichi had no intention of being left any further behind. Her simple exercises weren't going to allow her to catch up to her 2 prodigious teammates. No amount of sit-ups would compete with Sasuke-kun's Sharingan or Naruto's Oceanic Chakra Pool. I need to focus on my own strengths, the Pinkett acknowledged as she hugged her knees. I have really good chakra control and I am academically gifted. That means genjutsu and medical jutsu. Team 7's Kunoichi rose to her feet. Unfortunately, she had no idea where to really start looking for tutors. Team 8's sensei, Yuahi Kuranai, was renowned for her skills with genjutsu. The problem was that most Jonin were out of the village either doing high-ranking missions or hunting down Otogakur stragglers. Sakura wanted to punch something. She was truly embracing the shinobi arts for herself and no one else, and politics in a shadow war had to derail her plans. Wait, I want to punch something. Well, it's a start, Sakura thought. If she was going to improve, she had to be willing to embrace any source of training. Hinata was completing the required rituals for a traditional Jukin spar. Her sister, as usual, was perfect in form. Hanabi, Hinata's supremely talented younger sister, even held the bow at the perfect angle for the exact time required. As the Hyuga sisters ended their bow, a pair of wide grins escaped from the rigid and formal prison of Hyuga expectations. You've gotten much better, Oni-sama, Hanabi praised her sister. I'm glad you are pushing harder. It suits you. Thank you, sister. Hinata returned the smile. As Hiyashi's daughters exited the dojo, Hanabi indulged in her actual age. She was glad that Hinata had proven parts of the family wrong. The presumptive heiress had heard several times in the past that many Hyuga expected Hinata to forfeit any match with Neji. The incident several years ago had scarred Hinata. It was bad enough that Neji had tried to kill her in the spar, but Hiyashi had immediately activated the Juinjutsu. No one had expected Hinata to challenge Neji to a battle. Furthermore, there hadn't been any Hyuga who would have believed that Hinata would have challenged Neji at anything. If anyone had seen Hanabi's triumphant reaction to the news of her beloved sister's bravery, it could have easily been described as smug. So, Hanabi drew the word out teasingly. The younger girl saw the sudden tensing in Hinata's shoulders. Hanabi knew that Hinata knew that Hanabi knew. Chichi-Yui has given a boy permission to, you know. Why yes, Hinata admitted. Naruto-kun and I will be dating soon. We haven't had an official date yet. There is something important politically going on. I believe that he is waiting for the results of the upcoming Hokage election. Why is that? Naruto-kun is the apprentice of Jiraiya-sama. It would not surprise me if Jiraiya-sama has been nominated for Hokage. Naruto-kun, as Jiraiya-sama's apprentice, possibly has duties for the election. Hanabi hummed as she considered her sister's words. That stinks. I can't believe your first date is being held up because Uzumaki-san has to announce his master's arrival at the elections and just stand there while old people debate. I'm disappointed too, but Naruto-kun is in an honorable position, Hinata cautiously agreed. Adherence to tradition was a cardinal virtue of the Hyuga. It was undeniable bad form to push aside tradition for something as petty and personal as a first date. The Hokage election was for the greater glory of Konoha. The Hyuga had numerous Jonin and the candidates would have to win the support of the Hyuga in order to secure the highest honor in the village. I am willing to be patient. The election starts today. Our date will happen soon enough. There's that at least, Hanabi sighed. I just bought a spy camera and I wanted to use it. Hinata's eyes went wide. Hanabi-chan, you wouldn't spy on my date, would you? No, it's not like that. Spy photography cameras are just small enough to carry around and I want to have a way to keep memories forever. We only have a few pictures of Okawa-san. The elder sister wrapped her younger sister in a hug. There were so many emotions and statements that needed no words in the simple gesture. As with all good things, it came to an end far too quickly. The door to their grandfather's private sitting room opened. Hyuga Shuichi's stern visage looked down at his granddaughters. Hinata, if I may have a private word. Of course, grandfather, Hinata replied with a bow. She quickly turned to Hanabi. I will see you later, sister. Hanabi nodded and sent a silent, good luck, her sister's way. Hinata followed her grandfather into the sitting room. Shuichi sat quickly. He took a moment to gauge Hinata's reaction. The former head of the clan was pleased that Hinata did not immediately take a seat, nor say a word without being bidden. You may sit, granddaughter, the old man said neutrally. After completing the formal bow, Hinata graciously thanked her elder for permission. Today is the formal announcement of the candidates for Hokage. The nominees will not be made public until after the first round of voting is complete. I wish you to know one thing, Hinata. Hinata was curious. Her grandfather had never confided anything in her before. It was clear that Shuichi was making some form of play. Politics were the lifeblood of the Hyuga and they ran thicker and hotter in the Kage elder than anyone alive. What do you wish for me to know, grandfather? I promise that I will keep your confidence. Shuichi was pleased by the instantaneous formal response. The years of training hadn't been completely wasted on the girl after all. Tomorrow, when you discover the nominees, know that the Hyuga presented a united front in voting for him, except for your father. Him? Who are you speaking of, grandfather? Hinata wanted to curse her inability to contain her curiosity. Normally, Hinata would be appalled that she had provided Shuichi more grounds to push her further away from the clan. Today was a far different situation. Shuichi's eyes glinted in a manner far too similar to Akamaru when he cornered a rabbit. Hinata harbored no illusions that she was anything other than the rabbit. You will see, Shuichi said coldly. You may take your leave, Hinata. The Hyuga heiress quickly left. Her grandfather's presence was borderline toxic in the best of situations. Now, it was as if his toxicity was a film of sweat on an intolerably humid day. The worst part was that Hinata could not detect any falsehoods from her grandfather. The man seemed to enjoy telling lies that he could deflect away from himself. Their previous conversation was almost earnest. She couldn't trust Shuichi, though. Could she? Naruto felt so much better when he was doing something. The studying was definitely a useful thing for his campaign to become Hokage. There was no way to say that it was anything but important. It just wasn't Naruto's way of doing things. The young man needed to be active. That admission sent a pang of worry through his brain and heart. How was he going to be able to handle sitting behind that desk all day? Who am I kidding? Naruto groused. He would sit behind the desk because it was the price that had to be paid for achieving his dream. Konoha would need someone to be in charge. Uzumaki Naruto would be that someone. He could always stay active with training and walking around the village like old man Hokage used to do. Recalling both the fond memories of the third Hokage and Hiyashi's lessons, Naruto decided to head towards the markets. He had heard that the Land of Waves had discovered a ridiculous amount of coal in the southern parts of the country. That's probably why Gato was after the country, Naruto realized. He also realized that Wave owed Team 7, and Konoha, a favor or two. Maybe we could work out a deal with Tsunade and his people. The young Hokage candidate's thoughts were interrupted by an unholy racket. A horrible screeching and hissing pricked at the corners of his mind like a dozen Senbon needles. He, reluctantly, peered around the corner and saw a group of stray cats fighting near some garbage bins. Naruto was about to leave the area as quickly as possible, but 4 details on one of the cats jumped out at him like Haku out of one of his mirrors. First, one of the brown cats was very well fed. Second, Naruto had seen many stray cats fighting around Konoha before. The well-fed cat wasn't fighting like a stray. Third, the cat had a very distinct design on its forehead. It was a vertical line with 2 intersecting horizontal lines. If Naruto had any doubts of the cat's identity, the final detail screamed that any doubts were blatant stupidity. There was a, now tattered, red ribbon around the cat's right ear. The only cat Naruto had ever seen with a red ribbon around her ear was Tora, the cat of Madame Shijimi. The woman who was married to the fire daimyo and mother to his 3 legitimate children. Naruto grinned as he dashed forward. Operation Brownie Points was go. Naruto instantly created a Kage Bunshin. The Kage Bunshin substituted with Tora in a heartbeat. Naruto smiled as the clone used a selective henge to transform his vocal cords. The cage Bunshin tried to imitate Bull's bark. It wasn't a very good imitation, but the deep, obviously canine sound sent the cat scrambling. Naruto, in a brilliant moment of foresight, managed to scoop up the exhausted and hurt cat before the clone's little stunt. Let's go find your owner. I'll even try to get her to avoid squeezing the life out of you, Naruto promised the cat. Tora seemed to appreciate the gesture and Naruto's ginger handling and simply purred in exhaustion. There were only a few places swanky enough for the daimyo and his family. First, the Hokage's residence was probably the most nobility-friendly in Konoha. Naruto wasn't sure if the daimyo would be willing to shack up there without being the guest of a Hokage. The second was Hanamai's family home within Konoha. The other two were Hotel Ishikawa and the clan complexes. Again, Naruto wasn't sure if the daimyo would stay at some of those places. There wasn't any doubt in his young skull that the clans had invited the daimyo. It was just that if the daimyo accepted any of the invitations, there could be all sorts of problems. The daimyo's acceptance would give a ton of political clout to the clan he was visiting and might tip his hand to who he was supporting for Hokage. So, Amai-sama's place it is, Naruto announced. Tora huffed as she finally found a semi-comfortable position. The young Han's home was on the other side of Konoha. It was a pleasant walk. The admiring looks civilians gave Naruto helped. However, the looks that buoyed his spirits the most came from his fellow shinobi of the leaf. The looks were nothing less than gratitude for sparing them creation's worst D-rank mission. The looks faded away as he approached the local noble's home. Naruto didn't receive any adulation or admonishment. There was simply apathy. It seemed as if none of the flunkies in this area even recognized him. Well, Uzumaki Naruto couldn't stand for that. He swore they'd know exactly who he was by the end of the day. A detail quickly stood out to Naruto about Amai-sama's guards. They weren't levied peasants. These guards were professional soldiers. Naruto knew they couldn't use chakra by the way the men carried themselves. However, there was no doubt these were elite warriors. They might be able to take Genin out. Excuse me, Naruto stated clearly and calmly. He didn't want to seem pushy or nervous. That would set any guard, shinobi or not, on edge. That was the last thing he wanted to do. I am Uzumaki Naruto. Is Amai-sama available? The guards quickly shifted their attentions between themselves, Naruto, and the wounded but obviously the daimyo's wife's cat nestled in Naruto's arms. One of the soldiers stepped forward. Amai-sama has been eager to meet you, Uzumaki-san. I escort you to a sitting room. Naruto knew that there wasn't any disrespect in the pause before the honorific. They honestly weren't sure if Naruto should have Sama at the end of his name yet. He decided to simply respond with an enthusiastic, thanks. The room was comfortable, and fortunately for the energetic young man, he was not in one of the ornate chairs long enough to grow restless. Amaya Muyu threw aside the doors and strode purposefully into the room. While she wasn't an exceptional beauty, Amaya Muyu still carried the physique of someone who had undergone shinobi training. The combination of above-average conditioning and confidence like purest steel would always create an air that elevated her above others. Still, Naruto had heard tales of and personally seen women he considered more beautiful. Most importantly, however, Naruto had just enough sense to keep that thought to himself. Instead, he decided to be respectful and stand up. Good morning, Uzumaki-san. It is a pleasure to meet you, Amai said with a smile that almost appeared genuine. The fact that Ayumu was a politician made it a singular achievement. Naruto decided to rise to his feet. The gesture lost some of its respectful edge due to Tora deciding to yawn and meow loudly for food. The Hokage aspirant continued undeterred. It's great to meet you too, Amai-sama. Thank you for recovering Tora. Madam Shijimi will be glad that she is returned, mostly, safe. Would you care to explain what happened? Naruto chuckled and rubbed the back of his head. It's a story that starts with bad tea. At Ayumu's odd look, Naruto continued his tale. He didn't mention that his vocal cord transformation was originally part of his Waijutsu training. The noblewoman was silent for several moments. You can henge specific parts of your body. How is that even possible? The youngest Hokage candidate in Konoha's history looked a bit sheepish. Well, I'm not transforming just my voice. I'm transforming everything around it, too. I'm not that good with chakra control, to be honest. Not good with chakra control. Okay. Let's say he isn't being overly humble, and actually has bad control. That just means he has mastery over the transformation that is absolutely unreal, Ayumu thought quickly. Regardless, the Han chose her words delicately. That is very impressive. Almost as impressive as having Tora appear to like you. Hey, thanks, Naruto replied with equal mirth. Where is Shijimi-sama? I'm sure she'd like her cat back. If you would accompany me, Amai answered. So, Uzumaki-san, your team actually ped Hitaki Kakashi's test. Naruto could tell this story a million times. He started the story, but struggled to contain his usual wild gestures. Tora's presence served as a restraining device. Ayumu seemed to enjoy the story. She had informed Naruto of her own genin test when they arrived at an ornate door. The young man didn't have much experience with the upper crust of society, but he knew exactly whose room this was. Madam Shijimi, it is Ayumu. I am with Uzumaki Naruto, and Tora. The rest of Ayumu's announcement was cut off by a shrill cry of, my baby. And the doors nearly being torn off their hinges by a largely excited noblewoman. My baby. Madam Shijimi repeated. What happened? Naruto gently handed Tora back to her owner. To the young man's shock, Madam Shijimi didn't press the injured cat like a grape. She ran into some strays. I got there in time to scare the others off. Tora was fighting pretty well, but there were a few too many of the strays. I can't thank you enough. This is the second time you've brought my precious Tora back to me, Madam Shijimi responded. My husband and I have heard so much about you and your team. I'm just a shinobi of Konoha, Shijimi Dono. Naruto decided that playing the humble card was probably the best bet here. He didn't like holding off on bragging about himself, but sometimes it was the best policy. One who is making such a splendid name for yourself, the portly noble praised. Word of your liberation of those poor souls in Wave reached the capital. Naruto rubbed the back of his head. Well, it wasn't just me. Wave's people helped. My team helped. We worked together Ibeo. Ayumu nearly face-faulted. There was only one person who had a verbal tick like that. The Han quickly made some inane small talk. Partially, it was a test to see how Naruto handled the situation. It was also an attempt to see just how close a family connection Naruto had to her. As the talk died down and Naruto made an impressively polite exit, Ayumu was convinced. There was a connection to her. What a sweet young man, Shijimi cooed. That Naruto certainly is the most agreeable choice for Hokage that I have met so far. Ayumu nodded. He would make a fine successor to the Yondaime if he was more experienced. Ayumu-chan, that was a very specific word, Shijimi said coolly. We would have known if there was a successor. Ma'am, with all respect, would we have? How many people within the land of fire and without lust after the prospect of revenge against the Yondaime? I understand your point, but I can't imagine my dear husband keeping me out of the loop. The Han quickly decided it was in her enlightened self-interest to not contradict the daimyo's wife. Of course, ma'am. Madam Shijimi gingerly petted Tora. That Naruto is quite the young man. What are the chances he will become our next Hokage? Very good, actually, Ayumu admitted. His actions in Wave and defeating Tsunade's Jinchuriki have secured a great deal of respect and support among the shinobi of Konoha. The daimyo's wife nodded. I think he will make a splendid Hokage. My precious Tora is the best judge of people in the elemental nations. If she likes him, then I am going to support young Uzumaki Naruto's bid. Hanamai Ayumu held her tongue. The title of Hokage was far too important for support to be given based off of a cat's opinion. No one had ever accused Madame Shijimi of being a particularly deep or politically savvy woman. Still, at least she isn't supporting a walking disaster. Uzumaki Naruto might actually make a great Hokage one day. Udatane Kaharu was growing very worried. The choices for Hokage were all somewhat worrisome. Kaharu only really supported two candidates, but each had made their reluctance to take up the hat very clear. Jiraiya-sama and Danzo-sama, for reasons the aged Kunoichi could scarcely comprehend, had both actively campaigned against themselves. In a few hours, the only two legitimate candidates would throw away their chance to become the most powerful man in the world with such grace and humility that they would be regarded as heroes. Did they have no idea that their actions would be putting the two weakest candidates in the tower? Those are concerns for tonight, Kaharu reminded herself. The concerns for the moment were establishing the objectives for Anbu, intelligence, and other operatives to determine just how Konoha missed the build-up to the invasion. She had been the first to arrive. The documents and recommendations from her own review of the available information were prepared and ready. A troubling slash of self-doubt split her thoughts. The dominant personalities of Hiruzen, Danzo, and now Jiraiya had been pushing her further and further to the side. Kaharu may not be the dynamic public face of Konoha, but she was publicly recognized as a highly competent administrator. The day-to-day of Konoha had been her domain for years. She looked up from her melancholy line of thought as Jiraiya, Homura, and Danzo entered the conference room. Punctual as always, Kaharu. Jiraiya said with his trademark wolfish grin. There was humor in his voice, but it was not mocking. Kaharu could tell there was a respectful edge to it. He's still the most ungrateful brat I have ever known, the elderly Kunoichi groused. She could still remember, scratch that, she still recognized that Jiraiya was a complete scoundrel. Despite her misgivings about his personal habits, Kaharu truly believed he was an excellent candidate for Hokage. Mechanically, Kaharu participated in the meeting. The matriarch of the Udatane clan could not shake the feeling Konoha was about to commit a grave error. Tonight, I must convince the Jonin to support Danzo-sama or Jiraiya-sama. I cannot allow the disaster of Tsunade or the Uzumaki boy becoming Hokage to happen. There were many things Haruno Sakura had learned during her short shinobi career. She had learned how to mold her chakra for a substitution without hand seals. She had found 6 very efficient places to stab a man with a kunai in order to kill him quickly. Also, she had learned to expect the unexpected. It was all part of the job. Dealing with the unbearably awkward was still new. Hello Sasuke-kun, Sakura greeted her teammate and crush. Her voice was a jumbled mess of affection, adoration, confusion, and embarrassment. Sakura. Sasuke returned the greeting in his usual nonchalant monotone. In this moment, Sakura had discovered a rather sizable downside to Sasuke's cool and mysterious personality. It was very hard to get a read on his emotions sometimes. This was especially true when her teammate and object of her affections had several emotions playing against each other. The problem Sakura had with Sasuke's cool and mysterious demeanor was that he could easily hide which of his emotions were dominant at any moment. At the moment, Sakura was almost certain that surprise was the dominating emotion. Honestly, it shouldn't have been that much of a surprise on her part to see Sasuke surprised. Wow, Sakura thought, I am all over the place right now. The two members of Team 7 weren't really sure how to address Sakura holding several bright green, get well soon, balloons in one hand and a takeout order of spicy curry in the other. There was only one person Sakura would likely be going to visit. Sasuke was very aware that he shouldn't feel much of anything about Sakura's personal friendships. It was her life and personal business. That didn't mean that he wasn't feeling anything. Sasuke was trying to keep his annoyance and jealousy. Why was he feeling jealous about Sakura visiting him? Who will you be visiting in the hospital? Sasuke asked as casually as he could manage. Lee-kun, Sakura admitted with an equal amount of forced casualness. I am going to ask him for advice in training. The Forest of Death was a wake-up call for me. I swore that I was tired of looking at yours and Naruto's backs. You two are always so far ahead of me. I'm not letting that happen anymore. Today, I'm going to start surfing you both, and you'll be trying to catch up to me. The steadily rising fire in Sakura's voice was the latest shock to Sasuke's perception in a rather unusual encounter. For one, he was actually very impressed by Sakura's newfound determination. It suited her. With help from Lee, the words cut through Sasuke's newfound impression. He, admirably, managed to keep his veneer of indifference. The kunoichi sighed. She had thought that Sasuke was about to drop his emotional walls for a moment. Still, it is progress. It's not just Lee helping me. I'm helping Lee. There's a good chance he'll never be a shinobi again. That statement gave Sasuke a moment of pause. He could understand the pride being a shinobi provided. It was a major facet of Sasuke's purpose. The thought of having such a fundamental part of his existence stolen was easily more terrifying than the actual injury would be. Sasuke did something he never dreamed of doing, he relented. The change in Sakura was a welcome change. It showed that she was beginning to accept the shinobi world. The change in Sakura was also a worrying change. Sasuke had grown comfortable. His time on Team 7 was the closest thing to stability Sasuke had experienced since that night. Sasuke was confused about the intensity and direction of his thoughts towards his annoying girl teammate. He needed to get his stability back. That meant a conversation and, hopefully, a spar with Naruto. The Uchiha grudgingly admitted, only to himself, that Naruto's words after their fight had impacted him in a huge way. I wonder what Naruto would say about this. Sasuke asked himself while hoping that Naruto wouldn't rag on him too much. If that happened, Sasuke might just punch his best friend. I should get going, Sakura said quietly. I want to have plenty of time to talk with Lee and start training. Sasuke nodded. I'll see you later then. As Sasuke turned and left, he missed the blush, and the conflicted storm raging in Sakura's eyes. Turn around, brat, Jiraiya ordered as he watched Naruto fidget in the young man's new formal clothes. Not bad. That's it. Not bad. The Hokage candidate scoffed at the unbelievable slight his godfather leveled at him. I look frigging awesome. Jiraiya snorted. You look decent. Decent'll cut it in most circles. You're stepping into the upper crust of society. If you ain't amazing, you're failing. Well, I refuse to fail. What do I need to do? The Toad Sage couldn't help but smile at Naruto's determination. That was the type of guts that defined the last loyal and active Sannin's philosophy. Stand up straight. That slouch may say confidence, but it also says punk. If you were the daimyo, would you vote for a punk? Since I'm the only punk in this election, hell yes. Jiraiya rolled his eyes. Damn, you are raw. There's a lot you have to learn. Like Ma's technique. Naruto added hopefully. Like Ma's technique. Jiraiya wasn't looking forward to the reaction to his next statement. I actually can't teach it to you. Have you heard of hidden techniques? What do you mean you can't teach me? Hidden techniques. You mean it's a clan technique? Naruto snapped out his questions. It would be sacrilege for me to study your clan's techniques. They are yours. I can show you where Kushina stored them. The heck is sacrilege? Jiraiya took a second to finish adjusting Naruto's outfit. He was being hard on the brat, but Naruto needed to truly understand the stakes. That being said, Jiraiya also needed to distract Naruto from overthinking things. Teaching was a valuable tool for misdirection. Damn kid is like a sponge. Sacrilege is a violation of all that is holy. There are some lines that aren't crossed. Now, if we were talking about Kumo or Iwa hidden techniques, I'd be memorizing those suckers. Friendly hidens. Nah, I'll not be that kind of bastard. Oh, I guess that's cool. Naruto was struggling not to fidget. I'll have to give a speech tonight, won't I? Probably. Jiraiya confirmed as he nodded, for the first time today, probably ever, at Naruto's attire. Danzo's likely the only candidate who has a prepared speech. Naruto's grin promised all sorts of headaches, Jiraiya was certain of it. And that speech is going to be telling people to vote for me. I'm sorry, but what? The fifth Hokage candidate missed the dangerous edge in his sensei's question. The boy happily continued. Yeah, Danzo-ji stopped by a while back. Gave me info on Amai-sama and showed me what my chakra nature is. Useful, Jiraiya said while slipping into his Sanin tone of voice. Oh yeah, Naruto's enthusiasm made him miss Jiraiya's change in mood. He said that he didn't want to get in the way of our training, so he only showed me what my chakra nature is. Let me guess. Wind. Like your old man. The young man's face lit up. You're not messing with me. Kid, I'm the closest thing you've got to a grandfather. I want you to know everything about your parents that I can teach you. I appreciate it, Ero Sennin. Naruto's words and tone were respectful and sincere. The usual pang of annoyance at the disrespectful, if true, nickname lasted the briefest of heartbeats. Naruto's genuine gratitude and care destroyed that annoyance. I'm going to teach you something about your dad that'll help you tonight. Naruto's face lit up. Really? Minato was god-awful at writing speeches. Naruto's confidence fell at Jiraiya's declaration. He was really good at playing politicians and working their expectations. What? Jiraiya laughed. No one could play the humble soldier card better than Minato. That ploy made all those politicians underestimate him something fierce. So, basically, Pa made the Hans think he didn't have a clue about politics and they underestimated him. Got it in one, the Toad Sage praised. That, Naruto thought, was an idea worth using. Besides, no one had a bigger card to play than he did. Koharu wasn't surprised by the order candidates, hangers-on, and officials began to arrive. Danzo was one of the first to arrive outside of the selected Anbu, and likely route, guards. They were followed shortly by the ordered aides and flunkies of the daimyo and the Hans. As was proper for Anbu, the civilian officials had no idea they were being observed by 6 shinobi. The second candidate to arrive was Jiraiya-sama and his apprentice, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki Uzumaki Naruto. The wizened advisor could not truly consider the boy a serious Hokage candidate, no matter what Danzo or the Coastal Patrol divisions advocated. Naruto's charisma was undeniable. One did not simply rally an entire nation by luck. He was too young and inexperienced. That, combined with his status and burden, made him ill-suited for Hokage. At least he is here, Udatane thought bitterly. The other leading candidate, Senju Tsunade, was supremely talented. She was also supremely absent. The kunoichi watched as the others filtered in. Hanamai Ayumu arrived quickly and without wasted energy. Udatane-san, the noble greeted politely. Koharu continued to curse her former curtness with the former shinobi. I had always thought this day was a few years away, and that it would come because of retirement. It was a sentiment that Koharu could not dispute. Hiruzen may have drifted away from his teammates in his later years, but he was still a valued comrade and dear friend. Agreed. Everyone took their ignited places. The hour was near. All rise. Introducing the honorable and exalted daimyo of the Land of Fire, Araki Matabe. The embled officials and soldiers rose as protocol required, but outside of a few sycophants there was precious little enthusiasm. Koharu cast a quick glance towards her two favored candidates, Jiraiya-sama and Danzo-sama. They were masking their emotions well. Uzumaki Naruto was seemingly taking in everything about the proceedings. It was another strike against him. His emotional control was lacking. The potential was there, but it was not yet ready. Be seated. To the credit of all embled, no one groaned at the daimyo's pronouncement. Koharu eagerly awaited her moment to move Konoha along a positive path. Uzumaki Naruto was simply enjoying the moment. He was being counted among the elite of Konoha's shinobi force. The young Jinchuriki just wished the daimyo would stop using so much about the relationship he had with Konoha. I swear if he mentions that damn cat again. The youngest Hokage candidate had noticed the boredom in a lot of the other people. It reminded him of the academy when Mizuki had been teaching. Naruto's CL mates didn't really care about Mizuki, but had to keep up appearances. These are supposed to be grown-ups. Naruto struggled to keep from groaning. Finally, the daimyo decided to stop talking about how Hiruzen shared his love of sardine fish balls, after requesting a decanter of some wine Naruto had trouble pronouncing. Now, would each of our candidates stand? Shimura Danzo, Jiraiya of the Sannin, Sarutobi Asuma, Uzumaki Naruto, the daimyo, asked. Naruto recognized a smug command when he heard it. Where is Hatake Kakashi? Of course Kakashi-sensei would be late. Naruto pinched the bridge of his nose. Those who knew the copy nin weren't surprised in the least. The daimyo obviously wasn't familiar with Kakashi's habits. This is supposed to be an honor, the daimyo grumbled petulantly. Very well. I ask that each candidate present make one last appeal to earn the supreme honor of being the Land of Fire's ultimate military authority. Naruto could practically feel the determination not to be the first to speak. Fortunately, the daimyo took the lack of enthusiasm as deference. Lord Jiraiya, you are famous across the world for your way with words. If you would. Of course, my daimyo, Jiraiya acquiesced with a smile Naruto recognized. It was the same overly polite smile he gave to a pretty girl when he wanted attention. The smile appeared great on the surface but was as hollow as Naruto's carton of milk back home. I am humbled and honored by this great honor. Though, I wish these proceedings were unnecessary. I held Sarutobi-sensei in the highest esteem. Naruto could tell that Ero Sennin was about to go full cheesy. The young man was doing his best not to fidget in boredom as he waited for his sensei to get to the point. This was almost as bad as the daimyo. I will serve Konoha in any capacity she requires of me. If the emboldened shinobi feel that I am best served as leading Konoha rather than maintaining our military intelligence, then so be it. Thank you, Lord Jiraiya, the daimyo said drolly. He motioned for Jiraiya to take his seat. Now, Asuma, my friend, would you care to make your case? Naruto realized what the daimyo was doing. He did not get an official vote, but was trying to make his favored candidates obvious to everyone. Asuma's speech was simple and far shorter than Ero Sennin's ham-tastic tale. Team 10's sensei spoke of how honored he was to be considered worthy of his father's legacy. Naruto could tell that Asuma-sensei wasn't really interested in the job. The youngest candidate was really curious as to why Asuma-sensei wouldn't want to follow in the third's footsteps. That's a question for later, Naruto thought. Naruto suddenly felt his gut tighten. He knew what was coming. Now, the daimyo said with a smile that was obviously meant to humor Naruto. The Land of Fire's political leader clearly wasn't taking Naruto's Hokage bid seriously. Uzumaki Naruto, the youngest candidate in Konoha's history, make your case. Well, Naruto was going to show the daimyo that it was a mistake not to take him seriously. Thank you, daimyo-sama. Oh god, I have no idea what I'm doing, Naruto realized as he moved forward so that everyone could see him. He didn't mind being in front of crowds. Hell, he loved it. The roar of the crowd after his fight with Neji had been one of the high watermarks of his life. An idea formed and he looked to Ero Sennin for confirmation. The Toad Sage nodded gravely. Jiraiya's unspoken, "Go for it kid," was welcome. I know I didn't have as strong a connection to Hokage Gigi as Asuma-sensei, Jiraiya-sensei, and Danzo-sensei. The third wasn't my father, teacher, or teammate. I'd like to think he was a grandfather. He lived, and he died, for Konoha. We can't forget that. Not a bad start, Naruto. The Jinchuriki took a moment to remember Hokage Gigi and prevent from freaking out. Everyone in this room knows that I have yelled, graffiti Ed, and dreamed about becoming Hokage since I found out what the word meant. The invasion taught me a lot about what being Hokage actually means. It isn't just having the respect of the village and being in charge. If you're Hokage, you have to deal with being scared out of your mind. For the shinobi you can't fight alongside, for the people hiding in the shelters, for everything you can't be there for. Orochimaru wanted to be Hokage just to be in charge. I'm not going to be Orochimaru. I'm going to keep protecting the village, like Hokage Gigi, and my father. If this wasn't kind of a battle to secure his dream, Naruto would have considered the stunned silence part of his greatest prank. Everyone was hanging on to the edge of their seats. Ero Sennin and Danzo Gigi looked pretty serious. Then again, Danzo Gigi is probably always serious. Namikaze Minato, the fourth Hokage. Naruto might as well have set off a dozen explosive tags because the room freaked the hell out. Araki-sama eventually quieted the room with a snap of his fan. Uzumaki Naruto is correct. His father was Namikaze Minato. Continue, Uzumaki-san. I have been protecting Konoha since I was born, ya know. If I become Hokage, I'll just be adding a new and important way. I've also grown up, too. If you vote to make me Hokage, I'll have to give up on some plans and things I wanted for the future. If I'm Hokage, odds are that I'll never have a genin team. I won't get to tell my genin to be grateful I'm not annoyingly tardy like Kakashi-sensei. Naruto's last bit earned some chuckles. He almost felt bad throwing Kakashi-sensei under the bus to earn a few more votes. If Kakashi-sensei wanted to be Hokage, he shouldn't have been over 2 hours late. Thank you for making me the youngest Hokage candidate ever. I promise that when I become Hokage, tonight or 10 years from now, that I will be the greatest Hokage in history and I will make sure that Konoha and the Land of Fire remain the strongest of the great shinobi nations. Araki Matabe graciously allowed Naruto to return to his seat. Danzo and Jiraiya both gave, somewhat, approving nods at Naruto's speech. As Naruto sat down, he tried to take stock of the room. The good news was that he hadn't pissed anyone off. There were some people who had been neutral or, worse in Naruto's opinion, considering Naruto a joke that were now looking impressed. I've got this, Naruto thought as he truly believed he was going to win. And finally, Shimura Danzo. The floor is yours. Danzo was exaggerating his limp. Naruto was torn between being grateful that Danzo was trying to help Naruto win and upset that he wasn't giving his all to win the title of Hokage for himself. Eventually, Danzo reached the speaking platform. It is an honor to serve the village. Our service is our fundamental and sole purpose. Without the nation, there can be no security, no prosperity. It is the duty of those who serve the nation as a whole to put aside personal feelings for the good of the collective. Hiruzen, put aside the trivial concern of personal survival to ensure that Konoha achieved victory. The Hokage is dead. The position of Hokage survives. Uzumaki Naruto spoke to a fundamental truth. There is no want in regards to Hokage. There is only sacrifice. The foresight and understanding shown by one so young shows that we are marching towards a future where Konoha and the Land of Fire's power, prosperity and dominance are earned. Our nation can become unalienable. It requires a powerful Hokage. One who can counter any threat and rally the people to complete obedience. I am not that Hokage. Uzumaki Naruto is that Hokage. To those who believed I could best serve Konoha as Hokage, I extend my gratitude. I cannot, in conscience, extend my hand to accept the title. I ask all who support my candidacy to support Uzumaki Naruto. There was a moment where Naruto thought Danzo would simply head back to his seat. The young Jinchuriki could tell that the village elder had absolutely no respect for the daimyo. That would make people think he was a total tool and ignore anything he said though, Naruto realized. After Danzo, dutifully, returned to his seat, the daimyo began another speech. Uzumaki Naruto was now completely convinced the man just loved to hear himself talk. By a minor miracle, probably caused by Ma's spirit whacking him upside the head, Naruto avoided laughing out loud as he imagined the daimyo as a P. Udatane Kaharu, Matabe announced in a far too dramatic voice, has petitioned for the right to speak at this occasion. I have granted her this honor. As Udatane bowed, the daimyo cast a knowing glance at Naruto and Jiraiya. That didn't fill Naruto with confidence, to be completely honest. Thank you, Daimyo-sama, Udatane began with a formal tone. Sarutobi Hiruzen was a great Hokage and his leadership led us through many wars in the past. The pause was carefully timed. His later philosophies have shaped this generation. In this new war, we cannot fool ourselves into ignoring that Hiruzen's softness towards Orochimaru allowed this current war to be born. Konoha must elect a Hokage with the resolve necessary to safeguard the land of fire and Konoha from all threats, both foreign and domestic. I believe there are only two candidates who possess suitable resolve, Shimura Danzo and Jiraiya of the Sannin. Look at the alternatives. Sarutobi Asuma is an incredibly talented, loyal, and politically sound shinobi. But he is his father's son. There are two candidates who aren't even present. Tsunade of the Senju and Hatake Kakashi are two of the most powerful shinobi in the world. They can be, valuable ETS to Konoha. But can we trust them to lead us when they do not even answer the call of our daimyo and our jonin? Finally, Uzumaki Naruto is a boy. I do not doubt his potential, but he has not even been promoted to Chunin yet. In fact, he is barely out of the academy. His actions have contributed to the immediate prosperity and security of our nation, but he has no political foundation to lead us. In light of this, I must urge you to vote for Danzo-sama or Jiraiya-sama, for a safe and secure society. Naruto hated that speech. It hadn't been a bad speech, but that was part of the problem. That Kaharu lady had made a really good speech. It also was the last word anyone would get before the voting started. The only positive thing Naruto could say about the speech is that she was supporting Ero Sennin and Danzo. If Kaharu's speech shifted a whole lot of votes away from Naruto and that Tsunade lady, Naruto would still be guaranteed a promotion to Chunin if Danzo or Ero Sennin won. All in all, Naruto was either going to win or simply win. The young man could definitely get used to these kind of no-lose situations. The first round of voting shall commence. The daimyo's voice had the exact tone Naruto's did when Iruka-sensei said, "Free ramen." In this round, we will have secret ballots. My attendants will lead small groups to the voting area. Once the votes are cast, we shall adjourn for a time so that the votes may be tallied. Naruto was in the first group to vote as the row he was in was seated as close to the daimyo as the room's setup allowed. The attendant leading Naruto to his voting booth was a pretty girl a few years older than him. She was wearing a formal kimono that fit her incredibly well. Her reddish-brown hair was tied in a long braid that was tossed over her shoulder and still nearly reached her waist. Naruto couldn't believe that the daimyo winked knowingly at him. Naruto was beginning to wonder if everyone who currently outranked him was a pervert. This is your booth, Naruto-sama. I hope you win. It would be pleasant having someone other than flaky old men in positions of power. The combination of the unexpected support and a sultry tone of voice caused Naruto to blush and stammer out a thanks. In a complete shock to none of the Anbu keeping an unofficial tally, Naruto voted for himself. There was a very vocal part of Naruto's mind that was disappointed the hot chick had other duties. Still, he had finished early and so had Asuma. The Uzumaki shinobi had been wanting to talk to Team 10 Sensei and this was a perfect opportunity. Congrats on being nominated, Asuma Sensei, Naruto said as way of greeting. Asuma was fiddling with a lighter. You too, kid. Not even dad was this young when he was nominated. I miss your dad. Hokage Gigi was like the granddad I wish I had, Naruto said solemnly. He was great. I'll have to share some stories with you and Konohamaru sometime. That sounds great. Nay, Asuma Sensei, you wouldn't happen to know anyone with a wind chakra nature, would you? The third Hokage's son grinned. You're looking at Konoha's resident expert. Why, that is so cool. Danzo Gigi said there were only a few wind experts in Konoha. Could you teach me about wind nature? I just found out I've got wind nature. Danzo, Asuma repeated. I'll definitely want to clear my schedule to help you train with your chakra nature. And to minimize Danzo's influence on you, Asuma mentally declared. The two Hokage candidates worked out some rough details, but further conversation was curtailed by a pair of minor nobles arriving for small talk. Naruto wasn't sure who these two were, but decided that it was probably best to be somewhat polite. After a few minutes of utterly boring small talk, one of the nobles put a hand on Naruto's shoulder. As Naruto pushed the trained response to counter the alt aside, the noble smiled warmly. Young man, my maternal cousin is one of the leading commanders of Konoha's coastal patrol platoons. He has spoken of the renown you have earned in Wave. We really must speak in a more businesslike setting about the opportunities, all completely vetted by the late and sorely missed third Hokage, that your bridge has opened. Vetted was not the same as legal, Naruto instantly noticed. I'd like that. However, it is not my bridge. The people of Wave built and run the bridge. I'm sure old man Tazuna and the guys in Wave would be happy to do business with you. I'm sure I could put in a good word for you in Wave. The noble's face lit up. Thank you, Uzumaki-sama. Asuma shot Naruto a wry look of approval after the nobles had gone off to hobnob with others of their ilk. Nice dodge. You're too green to go into that kind of environment solo. Thanks, Asuma-sensei. Naruto decided that he should probably talk to potential voters. The young man's confidence was supreme and unalienable. He truly believed that he was going to make it to the second round of voting. Occasionally, Naruto would see Ero Sennin or Danzo watching his attempts to secure votes. They, and the people Naruto was talking to, seemed pretty impressed by his efforts. All in all, it was a good night. He just wished Kakashi-sensei was there to add some funny comment about Naruto being nominated for Hokage. The daimyo's living megaphone of a servant rang a bell to get everyone's attention. I present our esteemed daimyo with the results of the first round of voting. Tonight has been a signature moment in the history of Konoha and the Land of Fire. We have demonstrated our strength and unity in the FA. An unusually large swirl of chakra-laced wind and leaves interrupted the prepared speech. Naruto facepalmed as the debris cleared and a chunk settled on the frigging daimyo. In the center of the horribly ill-timed shunshin, Hitaki Kakashi stood in the most nonchalant posture known to mankind. So, Kakashi drawled while his visible eye did that really odd smiling look. What did I miss? There was a scandalized chatter flowing through the room like water. The civilians, and the daimyo to be honest, were horrified and insulted that a leading candidate for Hokage could be so casual and flippantly late. As the menials chattered in scandalized indignation, Uzumaki, Naruto and the other shinobi were having several different reactions. Danzo, Jiraiya, and Asuma all realized Kakashi's play almost instantly. Hitaki Kakashi had no desire to be Hokage. He knew that odds were that he made it to the second round of voting, even with his absence. The flippant and deliberate lateness he displayed was sure to piss off almost all the civilian voters and get them to switch their vote to a different candidate. Naruto, however, was having a very different reaction. First, Kakashi-sensei was his sensei. This was so embering. He kinda wanted to crawl under the bench and pretend one of his quasi-role models didn't just pull something so incredibly stupid. Secondly, it was an insult to the position of Hokage. Naruto had always been defensive of the position, his position, but after Jiraiya's revelation he was doubly protective. Kakashi-sensei, what the flying heck TT Ibeo? Naruto shouted. Fortunately, he wasn't so angry that he forgot to clean his language up just a tiny bit. Did you forget what this meeting is about? Did you forget that Daimyo-sama is standing right there? The copy nin casually turned his head to where Naruto was indignantly pointed. Oh, it must have slipped my mind. Naruto grumbled a million words, several not fit for the polite company present, before exaggerating a bow in the direction of the daimyo. I'm so sorry, Daimyo-sama, for my sensei. I promise that his tardiness hasn't rubbed off on me. I'm always big on getting places on time, and when I'm Hokage I will get to meetings with you early so your royalness doesn't have to wait. The daimyo flipped a fan in front of his face to avoid laughing at the childish, but genuine apology. Your honor and character are not affected by this display, Uzumaki-san. He sighed as he was well aware this probably would have happened regardless. Kakashi-san, if you could take a seat. Kakashi bowed politely as his act was up. He took an empty seat next to one of Amai's attendants. The young woman promptly went starry-eyed at being next to Kakashi and didn't hear the daimyo restart the announcements. As I mentioned a few moments ago, this election was not solely about selecting Konoha's Godime Hokage. A simple meeting amongst the Jonin could have easily selected the next leader of this proud shinobi village. I have complete faith in the shinobi who serve as one of the steadfast pillars of the Land of Fire. No, the purpose of this election is to show our strength as a nation, and contempt in the face of our enemies. Their invasion hurt us, but did not tear us apart or down. We were separated from many great men and women, but through this show of unity we honor their legacy and sacrifice. There was no greater loss than Sarutobi Hiruzen. The first round of voting for the Godime Hokage has been completed. It is my honor to announce that Senju Tsunade and Uzumaki Naruto have received the highest number of votes and will be in the second round of the election. May the unity we have shown continue. Naruto zoned out the rest of the speech. He fell back on a skill he had developed back in the academy. Speeches like this, or Iruka-sensei's lectures, always had a few key words. One just had to know the patterns and quirks of the speaker to pick up on them. As long as the daimyo avoided mentioning shinobi, Naruto would not really need to pay huge amounts of attention. The daimyo slipped into one of his tells and Naruto was instantly alert. Tomorrow morning, the citizens of Konoha will know the candidates for next leader of this, the oldest and grandest of the shinobi villages, will be. Tomorrow night, we shall have a Godime Hokage. Once again, Naruto zoned out the daimyo's self-congratulatory drivel. Finally, the collection of shinobi thought, the daimyo's living bullhorn proudly announced that the evening's proceedings were complete. All stood out of respect for the daimyo. The moment the daimyo slipped away, the flunkies, shinobi, and nobles were dismissed. You did well, brat, Jiraiya acknowledged that his student hadn't screwed up. Everyone in this room can see that you've got potential. Naruto opened his mouth to respond, but he was cut off by a head pat and a bored voice. You're welcome, by the way. Wait. Realization struck Naruto square in the face. That was on purpose. I'm not cut out for politics, Naruto. The field is where I belong, where I can do the most good for Konoha. The Hokage candidate nodded. If you think that's best. Still, I think you'd actually make a really good Hokage, sensei. Thanks, Naruto. Kakashi ruffled the soon-to-be promoted Genin's hair. They'd be proud of you. I can promise you that. Naruto looked down and seemed a bit shy for once. The compliment touched his heart. Naruto wanted nothing more than to quiz Kakashi about his parents. Alas, politics came first. Uzumaki-sama, the attractive girl from earlier in the election process, approached Naruto. Our daimyo requests your presence for T. The youngest Kage candidate in the history of any of the greater shinobi villages was not politically experienced. He was, however, not a total idiot. T was clearly code for, Daimyo-sama wants to chat about the election privately. T sounds fantastic. Please, take me straight to the daimyo, miss. I'm sure he's excited for T, Naruto replied with perfectly feigned enthusiasm. The waif curtsied and hid the grin she aimed at Naruto. Kakashi and Jiraiya waited until the pair were out of sight before exchanging a bro fist. We'll make him one of us yet, Kakashi. Hiashi stormed into the Hyuga compound. He knew exactly what this election was about and why Uzumaki Naruto had suddenly reaped a whirlwind of support. Natsu briskly approached her clan head and curtsied. Welcome home, Hiashi-sama. I need Ko, Hoito, and Hinata, my heir, in my private study immediately, Hiashi thundered. Natsu bowed and rushed to complete her instructions. The Hyuga head reached his study and indulged in a hefty pour of alcohol. He hadn't even bothered to look at the drink. All Hiashi cared about in that moment was the burn in his throat. The Hyuga clan head was very pleased to find that his closest confidants and his daughter were prompt in their arrival. We have arrived, father, Hinata announced with the full regal tone the clan had drilled into her since birth. Despite the late hour, her posture was flawless. Hiashi was greatly pleased. Ko and Hoito bowed to their clan leader. Konoha will have a new Hokage within the next 36 hours, Hiashi finally declared. There are elements within Konoha that seek to make our Godime a puppet. We cannot allow this to occur. May I ask, Hiyashi-sama, Ko began. Who our Godime Hokage will be? Uzumaki Naruto. Hinata heard her father's words, but could scarcely process them. She had always had absolute faith that Naruto would be Hokage. The Hyuga heiress had just never suspected it would be this soon. Hinata felt her entire world start to spin. She was absolutely sure that if it spun any faster, Hinata could pull the Kaden off using just the most basic chakra flare. Father, Naruto-kun, has not even been promoted to Chunin officially, Hinata said the first thing that came to her mind after, he asked me out yesterday. In an attempt to steady the world. Officially, Hiyashi confirmed in a rigid tone. Uzumaki-san is beyond worthy for promotion to Chunin, but there are those in Konoha who seek a puppet Hokage. Hoito received permission to speak from his clan head. Hiyashi-sama, there are factions in the clan who are cooperating with outside elements in regards to Uzumaki. We have advantages. Uzumaki-san has come to me for tutoring in legal matters. He is also fond of Hinata, Hiyashi revealed with a gesture towards his daughter. It is somewhat distasteful that we must also manipulate our next Hokage for a time, but would you have him guided or enslaved? Hinata continued to remain silent, but was torn over the necessity to protect Naruto and be completely honest with her crush. Guided, Hiyashi-sama, Hoito confirmed. Everyone else, including Hinata, nodded in agreement. He is so young. That is why our adversaries want to make Naruto-kun Hokage. He, Naruto-kun, has always wanted acknowledgement. If he is made Hokage, Naruto-kun will want to make those who elected him happy. But, Hinata trailed off as the realization she was speaking out loud dawned on her. But what, my daughter? Hiyashi asked, intrigued by the unexpected boldness and insight. Our opponents don't realize the positive effect Naruto-kun has on people. Naruto-kun rescued Neji from his darkness. The Kage's son was a murderer. He completely changed after being beaten by Naruto. Insightful, Hinata-sama, Hoito praised the heiress. Decorum demanded that Hiyashi hold his tongue, but inwardly he was ecstatic. This was the moment the Hyuga head had longed for. Hinata was confident. She was astute. She was Hyuga. Hiyashi-sama, Ko broached the subject carefully. How shall we proceed? With open arms. Naruto wasn't sure why the daimyo was smiling like the cat that ate the canary, but the young man was hoping it was a good sign. The Godime finalist took a quick look around the sitting room. It was lavishly furnished and shocking comfortable in spite of being so incredibly fancy. Thank you for inviting me to tea, Daimyo-sama, Naruto began safely. The daimyo took a sip of his own tea. Naruto quickly followed and made a genuinely appreciative noise. The tea was really good. Granted, it was the daimyo's tea. The lord of the land of fire wouldn't mess around with shoddy stuff. You are welcome, the daimyo replied. Continuing, I must thank you for being so prompt. It appears as if your speech after Hataki-san's unorthodox entrance was not simply damage control. Would you permit me to be frank, Uzumaki-san? Sure, Daimyo-sama, Naruto agreed. The daimyo weighed his words carefully before beginning. I have a great amount of respect for you personally, your accomplishments, and your lineage. I counted your parents as friends in addition to trusted confidants and allies. The grace at which you have handled your status as the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi is a testament to the strength of will you possess. You are already a singular shinobi. Naruto beamed at the recognition. He did sense but, coming fast. I personally do not believe you are ready for the administrative and diplomatic side of being Hokage yet. Though, the diplomatic responsibilities are mollified by your handling of the Kage's son. However, my misgivings will have to be tempered as you are going to win tomorrow. Of that, there can be no doubt. I've done my own budgeting for years. Naruto attempted to dig himself out of that hole just a bit. Admirable to be sure, the daimyo said smoothly. However, You will quickly discover that managing personal finances is very different from managing the economy of a village. Do you know how usury rates will impact the creation of new civilian businesses that will supplement the shinobi mission income? How about tax policy? Tariffs. How will you implement sound economic policy?